Good evening. It is good to be with you tonight. And some are probably away this evening at Bremen. I don't know that I would necessarily blame them for that. On this particular occasion, I heard Brother Eric Owen last night do an outstanding job on the plan of salvation. Just did, I think, a remarkable job, in fact. And tried to get him to come hold a meeting for us about 4 years ago. And he was booked so solid we didn't have a chance to get him in our place. But anyway, he still wants to come be with us sometime. Hopefully, prayerfully, we'll get him to come our way. And I look forward to that when it happens. I'm looking forward to this new series of studies. It's been quite a while since we've delved into a book, particularly a book in the Old Testament. And so I'm looking forward to our study in 1 Samuel. And if you have your Bibles, I hope and pray that you've already been reading ahead and you already know some of what we're going to be doing. What I would like to do in the class is I want to make sure that I'm standing here. I know Brother Waddell has said I did a better job teaching class from up there. And I suppose everyone has a right to see it that way. And I appreciate so much Brother Waddell and the kind words. He always has something very encouraging to say to me, and I appreciate that. He knew I was self-conscious, I think, about having to stand up there with a computer monitor and what have you, but won't be using that this time. It'll be strictly a textual study, and I'm standing here so that hopefully I will get you to engage more in this conversation, this study, first and perhaps even 2 Samuel. Of course, originally it was just one scroll, the book of Samuel. And when the Septuagint came out in about 200 BC in Alexandria, Egypt, the scroll was too large, and so it was divided into two. And so we have 1 and 2 Samuel dating back to the time of Septuagint, which was about 225 years before Christ. And so we still have 1 and 2 Samuel, but really just Samuel on the original scroll, in which you know, of course, that books at the time that this was compiled were very different than what we have. This is what we think of as a book. A book in Israel at the time of Samuel would have been a scroll, and it would be rolled out, and the section would be read based on where in the scroll you're reading. And so sometimes you see references in the New Testament to Old Testament passages, and there's no book, chapter, or verse. I'm sure you've noticed that. And that's because there were no book, chapters, or verses at the time the New Testament was written either. That didn't come until much later to make it easier to reference things. But you will have references to it was written before or as was written, and just simply a recitation of the text, but no book, chapter, and verse. I'm very thankful we have book, chapter, and verse. It makes it easier, of course, to reference the same place and to move from place to place. Now, when we're studying a book like Samuel, I prefer to read the text just in class. We will read the text together and make appropriate comments. But as we read the text together, I'm asking you to make notes. If you have questions, please feel free to ask those questions or comments. I would like to hear from you in that regard. As far as who wrote the book of Samuel, there is no one that has stepped forward yet and said, that would be me. And so we just do not know for sure and certain who wrote the book of Samuel. I do believe it's right to say that the book of Samuel, or we might say in our case, the books of Samuel, is a compilation of books. For example, I'm just going to give this as a citation here in 1 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 29. The text says that the acts of King David, first and last, indeed they are written in the book of Samuel the seer, in the book of Nathan the prophet, and the book of Gad the seer, with all his reign and his might and the events that happened to him, to Israel and to all the kingdoms of the land. Now you could read this and you could say, well, Samuel wrote his own book that bears his name. There's just one problem with that. There's a great deal of material in Samuel that doesn't include Samuel because he was dead. He didn't come back from the grave and write it. So the book of Samuel refers to some literature of Samuel's, the book of Nathan, the book of Gad. These are seers and are prophets. Same thing, used interchangeably. These are inspired men. And it's very likely that these inspired men had works that they wrote. And of course, they were compiled in this history that we have. The Jews considered the book of Samuel to be a book of prophecy. And we'll say more about that later. Yes, ma'am?
In this Bible that I have, and I'm just asking why, it says the first book of Samuel, otherwise called the first book of the Kings. Okay.
Why is it called that? Because we have the establishment of the monarchy and the kingdom in Israel. You're getting ahead of me again. You're doing what your husband does. You got to hold your horses. We'll get to that. In fact, I'll just mention that now. When you think of Samuel and its importance, what it provides us, provides a number of things. One of those is a bridge from the period of the judges to the period of the kings. And again, I want to take a few moments and discuss the period of the judges and the kings with you. But I'll also make this observation very quickly. There's a great messianic text in 2 Samuel, chapter 7. Extremely significant, in fact. And certainly we'll say more about that when we get to it. But there's obviously great value in studying these two books. Another aspect that comes out of 1 Samuel that I believe is worth noting, and that is that kings, when they were finally ordained and appointed, that even the king himself was subject to the law of God and was not free to do just as he pleased, which gave rise to the work and the role of prophets. Prophets became very significant. In fact, when you think about the prophets, many times the Jews would count the prophets from Samuel. They may include Moses, but from the time of Moses to the time of Samuel, who do you think of in the prophetic office? There were those in the period of the judges that certainly spoke for God, and they were, in that sense, prophets, as they were God's spokesmen. But in this prophetical role, you really don't see that until we get to the time of Samuel, which itself is significant. And Samuel, of course, plays a very leading role, not only in appointing the king, but also in keeping the king in check with God's will and God's word, and reminding the king that you, king, are subject to the law of God as is everyone else. Yes, Roger?
Also, note in the book of Samuel that we're going to run into worship that was unusual in the fact that they were in different places.
Well, we'll be saying more about that tonight, too. You're getting ahead of me again. But that's actually in my notes for tonight as far as the place of worship. But you're right. It is something that comes to mind as we read 1st and 2nd Samuel. When you think of the period of the judges, it's a significant period, depending on how you count the time frame. And it really matters because sometimes the period of the judges can overlap, and how much they overlap is up to dispute. And so we can have 275 years or as much as 350 years and really not have many qualms about it. It's just a matter of how you count the time, whether they're overlapping or whether they're concurrent, should I say, or whether they're separate time frames. So depending on how you count it, but just say roughly the period of the judges was around 300 years. Now, that's significant. When you think about, for example, the age of our country, how old is our country? 230, less than 230 years old. So it's not 300 years old yet, is it? And so we don't think of our nation as being really new. Maybe compared to the nations of Europe, it's a very new nation. But, We think 300 years is quite a period of time. I just want you to kind of get your mind around the period of the Judges, which, we got the book of Judges and the book of Ruth, and we put them together, and we have a big portion of the book of 1 Samuel under the period of the Judges. And that's it. But it covers quite a bit of time and a lot of history. And as far as the place of worship, for nearly 300 years or more or less, the place of worship was where? Shiloh. So when we think of the Jews and we think of their place of worship, what do we typically think of? And of course for good reason, but for 3 centuries it was in Shiloh. And again, we're going to say more about that when we get to it in just a moment. Now, when I think of the period of the Judges, something that's interesting because it sheds light on what we're about to encounter in 1 Samuel. In the book of Deuteronomy, God spoke about, through Moses, anticipated that eventually Israel would have a king. And he had Moses write about this king and what this king was to do and not to do and how he should behave and not be. So God certainly envisioned a king. However, when you consider the 3 centuries from the time of Moses to the time of Samuel, more or less, depending on how you count it, how was Israel governed? By judges. And so was there a central place of worship, but was there a central ruling authority for all the tribes? I find that very fascinating. Here's something I'd like to make note of. When you go to the book of Genesis, for example, which we studied not long ago, and you look at chapter 11, something happened there. What happened in chapter 11? What did mankind decide to do? Build a tower. Why? Make a name for themselves. They could all be together, all rally together. And so they wanted to create a united nations, literally. That's what we're reading, Genesis 11. And God said, I want nothing to do with that. And so God did what? And which resulted in what? They went everywhere, didn't they? Went in different directions. You come to the period of the Judges, and you have the tribe of Benjamin was almost utterly annihilated. Why? Because they were perverse and immoral people. They later would become quite the opposite and have a very different reputation in time to come. But during the period of the Judges, they were scoundrels. So much so that the other tribes ganged up on them and literally almost annihilated an entire tribe. Now, when you think about that arrangement of the 12 tribes, or should I say those tribes that were scattered around, however many there were, because they commingled sometimes. But when you think about those tribes, what benefit is there in having a separate confederation of tribes as opposed to one central ruling body over all of the tribes? Is there any benefit in that?
You wouldn't have the problem with idolatry as widespread.
Okay, so let's say, for example, you had an Ahab and a Jezebel, and they were reigning as king and queen from your capital, right? Now, would they have any influence over the other members of their nation as to whether or not idolatry was ensconced and accepted and embraced? But, so if they were king and queen over 10 of the tribes, that means 10 of the tribes were pretty much dominated by idolatry, right? But what if they were only king and queen of one tribe and it went bad? Would the other tribe necessarily have to follow suit? I'm just saying, when you look at it biblically speaking, and you come to the New Testament, for example, and you find congregations of God's people, where do you read about central headquarters for the body of Christ? Where is that? In heaven, yeah, where Christ is at the right hand of God. But I mean, do we answer to Jerusalem? Do we answer to Rome? Do we answer to some synod, or do we answer to some group in Tennessee or New York or someplace where they're headquartered, and we have to ask whether we can do this or that or the other. Who rules over this congregation? Under whose leadership? And so if this congregation apostatizes, we go off the deep end, we do crazy things or whatever and have bad ideas, does that mean that the Bremen congregation is going to go that way? Are they obligated and duty-bound to do that? Or Bowden or West Georgia or any other congregation? Are they going to necessarily follow suit? They may be influenced by us. But you understand there's great wisdom in this separation. And so when the people of Israel eventually are going to call for a king, Samuel was disturbed over that because he took it personal, because he was then the judge in Israel. And so he took it as a rejection of himself. But what did God say to Samuel? They're not rejecting you, but they're rejecting me. And so when you think about the beauty of this nation as originally established before the advent of Abraham Lincoln, I want you to think about this nation as originally envisioned by the founders. I want you to think about their view of things. Who did they think primarily should rule in this new republic?
State rights.
Nope. God. Absolutely. And they wanted states' rights. Why? For the very principle I'm outlining in this class tonight. These very principles. They understood that if you centralize too much power in one place, then what happened with absolute power? It does what? So if you can keep it divided in a confederation, are you going to have states that do things they ought not? Yes. Are you going to have other states that do better than other states? Yes. But what if you had one ruling body that ruled all of the states? You might have a situation, for example, where the Supreme Court tells all 50 states, you will recognize same-sex marriage. That is not what the founders originally intended. Now, could something like that happen in Vermont? Yeah. California? Of course, we'd expect it there. But in Georgia? No. Now, you can flip it around. You can say, let's go back to the 1850s or 60s. I mean, we had slaves here. Bad thing, right? Did they have slaves up north? No, they just paid for it and bought slaves and benefited from their labor, but no, they didn't actually have slaves. So they had the upper hand, morally speaking, at that time, right? You understand how things can flip around, but my point being, when you have a central authority, and that's what I believe is the greatest tragedy of our nation, is that we lost sight of the principles that would be gleaned if we just studied what God has revealed to us in the book of Judges and in Samuel. Did God give them a king? Yes. Did God warn them what's going to happen? Yes. What did eventually happen? Disaster came to Israel as a result of their having a king. It just never worked out the way it should. But anyway, those are my soapbox thoughts for tonight. Now, chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. I do think there's some value, though, in considering that. I actually saw something on TV the other day. I'm probably going to get me shot for saying it. But I saw something, I caught the tail end of it. But it was something about the real Abraham Lincoln. And I thought, finally someone has the courage to state what actually happened with Abraham Lincoln. He literally envisioned something different for this nation than our founders did. And no, it was not because he was morally objecting to slavery. It was not his rationale. He wanted to have a universal authority in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to be it, and he did what he had to, and he used the issue of the day to advance his purpose. But that is an unfortunate fact in our nation's history. And now historians are at least making television documentaries and bringing that to our attention, which I think is finally grand, that people can see the truth of what actually happened. Yes, you had a comment?
I understand he was a member of the church at some time.
I think there was some slight association with the Restoration movement. I don't know if he was actually a member of the church or not. But there was some connection, I think, with his family. Probably his wife, maybe. Have you read about Abraham Lincoln much? He did send his general down here to Georgia to burn it to the ground. Okay. Anyway, we have some Indiana people in the class. We have to be careful. And some Ohio people, too. 1 Samuel chapter 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah. The name of the other is Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And it happened, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Eli answered and said, Go in peace. The God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord. Now the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, Not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took up with her with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lived, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worshiped the Lord there. So Elkanah is an Ephraimite, but he's not of the tribe of Ephraim. And we know this from the reading in 1 Chronicles 6:31. He's an Ephraimite only in a legal sense, a legal standing. What portion in Israel did the Levites have? They didn't have a portion, did they? And so what were the Levites to do? Scatter themselves among the tribes, live among the tribes, and be provided for from among their tribes. They were God's servants, leading in worship. And so the priest did not have a place that they called their own. So this man, Elkanah, was of that priestly class, or the tribe of Levi anyhow. 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 31, if you don't want to turn there, just listen as I read quickly the text. The writer said, "These are the men whom David appointed over the service of song in the house of the Lord after the ark came to rest. They were ministering with music before the dwelling place of the tabernacle of meeting until Solomon had built the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, and they served in their office according to their order. And these are the ones who ministered with their sons. The sons of the Kohathites were Heman, the singer, the son of Joel, the son of Samuel, the son of Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Eliel, the son of Toah." So this is a man that is certainly a Levite, and he's called an Ephraimite only in a legal sense. That would be how he would identify himself. It'd be kind of like saying, "I'm an American," or "I'm a Southerner," or what have you. But it wouldn't mean that's who I am ethnically, or that wouldn't necessarily be the place of his tribe, because the Levites had no particular place of their own. Now the text says of Elkanah that he had 2 wives. How many too many did he have? I was going to say 2, but he had 1 too many wives, right? Why don't we have more than 1 wife now, guys? Where did God ever authorize it? Genesis chapter 4, verse 19. Lamech is the first individual we know of to do this, to have more than 1 wife. Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. Genesis 4, 19 to 20. Abraham had multiple wives and concubines. The world is still suffering as a result of Abraham having more than 1 wife. In fact, they make the news practically every day. In Matthew chapter 19, when Jesus was asked about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, he said something rather interesting. Why, they said, did Moses grant a bill of divorce to put your wife away if you're arguing that we shouldn't put our wives away? From what, Jesus said? From the beginning, what? What was not so? Divorce was never contemplated. But from the beginning, what was stated by Jesus? 1 man, 1 woman. That was it. That's God's plan. It's not complicated. We complicate it, or we did. Muslims still complicate it to this day because they still do the Jewish thing of having more than 1 wife. They borrowed everything from Judaism and some aberrant form of Christianity, but nevertheless, they still have more than 1 wife. Many of them do. And it's still a bane of anyone's existence in such an arrangement. Of course, the Mormons do such a thing, which is just unseemly. How often do you think it would work out to have more than 1 wife, ladies? Never? Never ever? Not even close? You're not going to share him? Now, you got to admit, you get mad enough sometimes. She got all she needs, right? So, is that why you want to just, never mind, she wants to kill me all the time, but, you haven't tried to, but you've threatened many times. All right, it has been a while. Not really a direct threat, just, you're going to die. Well, I know that. So they went annually to Shiloh. This is significant. I already mentioned 3 centuries, roughly. The central place of worship for all the people of Israel was in Shiloh.
That's where the tabernacle was.
That's where the tabernacle was. Yes, sir.
Moses said in Deuteronomy, God will tell you where to worship.
Deuteronomy chapter 12. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. I'm going to read it. It's really worth noting. Deuteronomy 12, God was concerned as Israel was about to enter the land of Canaan, because when you go into the land of Canaan, you're going to find shrines everywhere to these various gods. And on every high hill and under every green tree, they're going to have an altar erected to some god or some deity that they've contrived in their own minds. And God said, utterly destroy all those. Get rid of them. But you're not going to do that. You're not going to worship that way when you go into the land of Canaan. But you're going to go to the place I tell you to go. In fact, verse 4 of Deuteronomy 12, you shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. You shall seek the place where the Lord your God chooses out of all your tribes to put his name for his dwelling place, and there you shall go. There you shall take your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your hand, your vowed offerings, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice in all to which you have put your hand, you and your households, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. You shall not at all do as we are here today, every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. For as yet you have not come to the rest and the inheritance which the Lord your God is giving you. But when you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies around about, so that you dwell in safety, then there will be the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offering, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your hand, and all your choice offering which you vowed to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male, female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates, since he has no portion nor inheritance with you. So again, we have a reference to the Levites and a reminder they're dispersed throughout Israel. They have no particular place of their own. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. After they'd settled the land and pretty much subdued it, Joshua 18 verse 1 says, the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle and meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. Joshua 18 verses 1 to 2. So the place that God chose, he chose it. Joshua was there to see to it that it was done. And there was the place of worship and the tabernacle set up, and it stayed there. But we're about to see a drastic change. All of that is about to come to an end. And we're going to read that in the first few chapters of the book of Samuel. That's where we're quickly headed. Before we get there, I want to reference something from the book of Jeremiah. We're jumping ahead in time from 1 Samuel. But when you go to Jeremiah chapter 7, we're moving beyond in time. But Jeremiah is preaching a sermon and he's making a point. In Jeremiah 7 verse 12, go to my place which was in Shiloh. This is Jeremiah 7 verse 12. Where I set my name at the first, God speaking through the prophet. See what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. And now because you've done all these works, says the Lord, and I spoke to you rising up early speaking, but you did not hear, and I called, but you did not answer. Therefore, I will do to the house of which is called by my name, in which you trust, and to this place which I have gave to you and your fathers, as I've done to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my sight, as I've cast out all your brethren, the whole posterity of Ephraim. This was something unimaginable to the people of Jeremiah's day. In fact, they were taking delight in the fact that they were in Jerusalem where the temple was still standing. And so they had this little recitation, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord of these. As though just reciting these words somehow shielded them and protected them from the advances of Nebuchadnezzar and his army. And God said, I want you to consider what it did to Shiloh. It was there for centuries, and I removed it. And I can remove you from Jerusalem as well, and he did. So again, it's important to recognize the significance of this place of worship. Anyone have a Revised Standard Version on your phone or in your hand, and you can access it readily, a Revised Standard Version? I'm just curious about something.
That's the New King James.
No, that's what I'm using. Verse 4 of chapter 1. You have it? 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 4. Revised Standard, yes. have it?
The bow of the mighty man are broken, and they that stumble are girded with the string.
Is that 1 Samuel?
1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4.
Chapter 1, verse 4.
And when the day came that Enoch sacrificed, he gave to Hannah his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters portions.
That's all it says, gave him portions? Okay, I'm not sure. I read something earlier that seemed to reverse what we're reading here. So as far as him allotting to each of his wives portions, who got the most? Okay, but someone was observing today that the Hebrew actually has it the opposite, and that Peninnah got more.
Revised, if you continue to read on, would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. And although he loved Hannah, he would give Hannah only one portion.
That's what I'm looking. He would only give her one portion. So that's a very different, completely different than what we're reading in any other text.
He named it a worthy portion.
Yeah, worthy. But English Standard Version, verses 4 and 5. Anyone want to read that for me? Yeah.
On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb.
I really like the English Standard Version. I always have preferred it. I never really have been a fan of the Revised Standard Version for a number of reasons. But someone's claiming that Revised Standard in this instance got it right. You might argue it makes sense because Peninnah did have children, and naturally they would require more than Hannah. But I've always understood this to mean it's kind of a touching gesture on the part of her husband. Certainly he gave enough for Peninnah and her sons or children to have their part, but he gave Elkanah, Hannah, he gave her a double portion or a worthy portion. Because who did he prefer? And so he chose his favorite wife, which is usually not a very good idea. If you're going to have more than one, you shouldn't let the other one know who's your favorite. But nevertheless, she's clearly the favorite, and he probably showed it by these gifts, which probably explained why Peninnah is, I got children and you don't. Just pettiness. Yes, ma'am?
In my ESV, there's a footnote that says that in the Septuagint, it says, although he loved Hannah, he would give Hannah only one portion.
That's what the Revised Standard Version is. So they're basically on the Septuagint reading. Okay, that would explain it then. That would explain it. All right. All right, so he was to be a young man given to the Lord, and what was never to happen to his head? What does that mean? What is she saying in that? What'd you say? You gonna smell bad? No. Oh. It was going to be, she was saying in this prayer, I will give him to the Lord as a Nazarite. And again, if you want to know about Nazarites, Numbers chapter 6, I'll just read the whole law about Nazarites. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine, nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation, he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, from seed to skin. All the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. All the day that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he shall be holy to the Lord. It's contemplated here that someone could take a Nazirite vow for a limited period of time. And during that limited period of time, these things would apply. But in the case of Samuel, he was to be a Nazirite for how long? His whole life.
What about John the Baptist? Did he fall into that category?
He seems to have, doesn't he? I'm not sure it specifically said that he was a Nazirite. He seemed to be in that light. But nevertheless, he couldn't even go to his parents' funeral. I mean, this was a lifelong separation for Samuel. And so Hannah goes to pray. And as she's praying, Eli sees her lips moving, but he didn't hear anything coming out of her mouth. And so what does he conclude? It's interesting, isn't it? Why would he think that about her? Jesus said in John chapter 7, verse 24, judge not according to the appearance, but judge how? Righteous judgment. Are we prone to draw conclusions? To ask is to answer, isn't it? It depends on how petty you may be, or how angry you may be, or how lustful you may be. You could any number of emotional thoughts plugged in there as to how you may judge someone. And it may be how self-righteous you are. It's easy to look down on others. Here's this godly woman in the house of the Lord, standing, we know from chapter 2, standing and praying, and the high priest thinks she's drunk because he sees her lips move but didn't hear anything. Now, I don't know about you, if I saw someone standing in the church building with their eyes closed maybe and mouth moving, I wouldn't want to disturb them, but I don't know that I would say you're drunk. I'm just not sure why he would draw that particular conclusion. But I think it's fascinating to hear her response. And the English Standard Version, I think, probably gets it better here than the New King James. Verse 16, do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman. Well, that's good. I think English Standard Version says worthless woman.
You said the daughter of Belial.
A daughter of Belial, same thing, worthless or wicked. So in her response, she's saying, is she not, that a drunkard is what kind of person? Wicked, daughter of Belial, worthless. But wait a minute. She brought wine to Eli when she returned. You know, this is, I think, the problem that a lot of people have today when they're reading about strong drink and intoxicating beverage in the Bible. It's a simple failure to note the meaning of certain words. In the Hebrew text, the word yayin is translated wine. And tirosh is translated wine. Now, those terms are used generically. What does that mean?
We use the word beverage.
Okay, drink. Does it have to be intoxicating? No. It can be, or it's not necessarily have to be. Same thing happens in the New Testament. The word that's translated in our English text, wine, is from the Greek term oinos. It's a generic term. Oinos can refer to the form of the grape in any form. It could be intoxicating or non-intoxicating. Let me give you an example of the Old Testament use of the term. In Isaiah 65, verse 8, thus says the Lord, as the new wine is found in the cluster. One version says, while in the grape. In other words, it's still in the berry, it's still hanging on the vine, and God calls it wine. You get drunk from picking a grape and eating it? Here's something else to consider very quickly. And we're going to have to finish this before we run out. I've just got 2 passages. Can you do that? Can I go? I'm pushing it too, okay? Please?
Waste of time.
Pretty please. The Lord, this is Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8. This is important to know. Leviticus 10, verse 8. The Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your son with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, between unclean and clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8 through 11. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 9. Same writer, same book. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give to you, and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it, and you shall offer on that day, when you have waved the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to the Lord for a sweet aroma, and its drink offering shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. But didn't Moses say earlier, you're not supposed to have wine? How could he say don't have wine and then he said have wine? Well, that's confusing to us because we hear one word. And in our mind we think of Ernest and Julio Gallo or some kind of bottle of intoxicating drink. But wine, as used in the Old Testament and New Testament, was used generically. It may mean strong drink. It may mean intoxicating beverage. It may mean grape juice. It may mean, as the expression, I think this is fascinating, fruit of the vine, relating to the New Testament.
Well, in
Anyway.
the translation of any word, you have to have the context,
Yes.
mean what's going on.
We don't have time. I'm hurrying through this. We'll pick this up again, Lord's willing, next Wednesday. And I want to explore this a little further with you because I know that it's a great source of confusion to a lot of people because they read wine and they say, see, there, Jesus turned water to wine. So there you go. You can drink wine. That's, I think, a tragic mistake that a lot of people make in not distinguishing between the use of the term in Scripture. But anyway, we'll hopefully have more time to say that next week. Thank you for your time and attention. Did the bell ring? I'm pretty sure it did, didn't it? Did someone go over to the library? Anybody go over there? We didn't have a class in the library? Number 291, is that correct?